Hello, hello, and welcome, Billionairettes. My name is Vanessa Black, and I'm so happy and grateful that you are here because we're going to invest the next 20 minutes or so on our personal growth and continuing to dive into this book that we are reading right now called Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. Let me know your thoughts if you've been following along. We are currently on chapter 3, part 3 of chapter 3, and would love to know your thoughts, would love to know your feedback in the comments. And if you're just joining us right now, then go check out the playlist as well after this, because we have chapter 1, chapter 2, and the first two parts of chapter 3 on this particular chapter of understanding and combating shame. Yes, I said shame. Brené Brown is all about vulnerability, shame, teaching us how to understand what those two things are, as well as how to dare greatly in this particular book in our lives on a day-to-day basis. So I'm so excited to continue to dive into here. Let's wait no longer and let's do it. Let's start on page 94 if you have the physical book. If you don't, no worries. That's why you can listen in here. And I do encourage you to get the physical copy. If you don't have it, it's awesome to be able to read it and listen in at the same time, as well as connect and hold each other accountable on continuing our personal development so we can develop our minds, our bodies, our souls on a daily basis and achieve that personal freedom in our lives, as well as financial freedom. So that's what we're about here at Billionairettes. Isabel, my love, my partner in life and business, is currently reading The Compound Effect, which is an incredible book for the financial freedom book choice of this particular month. So go check out the playlist if you want to check out The Compound Effect. If you have a business, if you're looking to achieve your goals, your dreams in your life, that is an incredible, incredible book. Without further ado, I'm going to dive right into this one, all right? Because this is amazing as well. So pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. As I've learned more about men and their experiences with shame, we talked about females a little bit earlier in the last part, I still see that image of a shipping crate with a big stamp across it that reads, "Caution. Do not be perceived as weak. I see how boys are issued a crate when they're born. It's not too crowded when they're toddlers. They're still small and can move around a bit. They can cry and hold on to mama, but as they grow older, they're less and less wiggle room. By the time they're grown men, it's suffocating. But just as with women, men are caught in their own double bind. Over the past couple of years, especially since the economic downturn, what I've started to see is the box from the Wizard of Oz. I'm talking about the small curtain concealed box that the wizard stands in as he's controlling his mechanical, great and powerful Oz image. As scarcity has grabbed hold of our culture, it's not just don't be perceived as weak, but also you better be great and all powerful. This image first came to mind when I interviewed a man who was in deep shame about getting downsized. He told me, "It's funny, my father knows, my two closest friends know, but my wife doesn't know. It's been 6 months, and every morning I still get dressed and leave the house like I'm going to work. I drive across town, sit in coffee shops, and look for a job. I'm a skilled interviewer, but I can imagine that the look on my face conveyed something like, 'How on earth did you pull that off?' Without waiting for the next question, he answered, 'She doesn't want to know. If she already knows, she wants me to keep pretending. Trust me, if I find another job and tell her after I'm back at work, she'll be grateful. Knowing would change the way she feels about me. She didn't sign up for this.' I was not prepared to hear over and over from men how the women, the mothers, sisters, girlfriends, wives in their lives are constantly criticizing them for not being open and vulnerable and intimate. All the while they are standing in front of that cramped wizard closet where their men are huddled inside, adjusting the curtain and making sure no one sees in and no one gets out. There was a moment when I was driving home from an interview with a small group of men and thought, holy SHIT, I am the patriarchy. Here's a painful pattern that emerged from my research with men. We ask them to be vulnerable, we beg them to let us in, and we plead with them to tell us when they're afraid, but The truth is that most women can't stomach it. In those moments when real vulnerability happens in men, most of us recoil with fear, and that fear manifests as everything from disappointment to disgust. And men are very smart. They know the risk, and they see the look in our eyes when we're thinking, come on, pull it together, man up. As Joy Reynolds, one of my mentors and the dean at our church, once told me during a conversation about men, shame and vulnerability, men know what women really want. They want us to pretend to be vulnerable. We get really good at pretending. Covert shame hurts just as much as overt shame. Take, for example, the man who told me that he was always feeling shame with his wife around money. He said the latest instance when his wife came home and said, I just saw Katie's new house. It's amazing. She's so happy to finally get that dream house. On top of that, she's going to quit working next year. He told me his immediate response was rage, so he picked a fight with his wife about her mother coming to visit, and then quickly disappeared to another part of the house. As we were talking about this conversation, he said it was shame. Why did she have to say that? I get it. Katie's husband makes a lot of money. He takes better care of her. I can't compete. When I asked him if he thought that it was her intention to hurt him or shame him, he responded, I'm not sure. Who knows? I turned down a job that paid a lot more but required traveling 3 weeks out of the month. She said she was supportive and that she and the kids would miss me too much, but now she makes little comments about money all of the time. I have no idea what to think. Pissed off or shut down. I don't want to oversimplify something as complex as the response to shame, but I have to say that when it comes to men, there seems to be two primary responses: pissed off or shut down. Of course, like women, as men develop shame resilience, this changes and men learn to respond to shame with awareness, self-compassion, and empathy. But without that awareness, when men feel that rush of inadequacy and smallness, they normally respond with anger and or by completely turning off. Once I had collected enough interviews to start seeing strong patterns and themes, I scheduled interviews with several male therapists who specialize in men's issues. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't filtering what I heard from the men through my own experiences. When I asked one of these therapists about the concept of pissed off or shut down, he told me the story to illustrate the point. When he was a freshman in high school, he tried out and made the football team. On the first day of practice, his coach told the boys to line up on the line of scrimmage. The therapist had grown up playing a lot of football in his neighborhood, but this was his first experience on a field in full pads across from boys whose goal was to flatten him. He said, I was suddenly afraid. I was thinking about how much it was going to hurt, and I guess the fear showed up on my face. He said his coach yelled his last name and said, don't be a Pussy. Get on the line. He said he immediately felt shame course through his body. In that single moment, I became very clear about how the world works and what it means to be a man. I'm not allowed to be afraid. I'm not allowed to show fear. I am not allowed to be vulnerable. Shame is being afraid, showing fear, or being vulnerable. When I asked him what he did next, he looked me in the eye and said, I turned my fear into rage and steamrolled over the guy in front of me. It worked so well that I spent the next 20 years turning my fear and vulnerability into rage and steamrolling anyone who was across from me. My wife, my children, my employees. There was no other way out from underneath the fear and the shame. I heard such grief and clarity in his voice as he was saying this to me. It made total sense. Fear and vulnerability are powerful emotions. You can't just wish them away. You have to do something with them. Many men, in fact, use very psychological descriptions when they talk to me about pissed off or shut down. It's almost as if shame, criticism, and ridicule are physically intolerable. The therapist concluded, I got into therapy when my rage and my drinking were no longer manageable. When it started costing me my marriage and my relationships with my children, that's why I do the work I do today. Shame resilience, the 4 elements we discussed in the previous chapter, is about finding a middle path, an option that allows us to stay engaged and to find the emotional courage we need to respond in a way that aligns with our values. Page 98, I'm only as hard on others as I am on myself. Just like the father coming down on his budding artist son or the coach giving his player a hard time, women can also be very hard on other women. We are hard on others because we're hard on ourselves. That's exactly how judgment works. Finding someone to put down, judge, or criticize because becomes a way to get out of the web or call attention away from our box. If you're doing worse than I am at something, I think my chances of surviving are better. Steve and I met lifeguarding and coaching swimming. The big rule in lifeguarding is to utilize any means possible before you actually jump in and try to pull someone out of the water. Even though you're a strong swimmer and the person you're trying to help is half your size, a desperate person will do anything to save themselves, to grab a breath, including drowning you in their effort to survive. The same is true for women and the shame web. We're so desperate to get out and stay out of shame that we're constantly serving up the people around us as more deserving prey. What's ironic, or perhaps natural, is that research tells us that we judge people in areas where we're vulnerable to shame, especially picking folks who are doing worse than we're doing. If I feel good about my parenting, I have no interest in judging other people's choices. If I feel good about my body, I don't go around making fun of other people's weight or appearance. We're hard on each other because we're using each other as a launching pad out of our own perceived shaming deficiency. It's hurtful and ineffective. And if you look at the mean girl culture in middle schools and high schools, it's also contagious. We've handed this counterfeit survival mechanism down to our children. In my interviews with teachers and school administrators, two patterns emerge that speak directly to this issue. The first pattern reported by faculty and principals was that often the children who are engaging in the bullying behaviors or vying for social ranking by putting down others have parents who engage in the same behaviors. When it came to girls, a phrase that kept emerging from the interviews was, the parents aren't upset by their daughters' behaviors. They're proud of them for being popular. One school administrator likened this behavior to the fathers who first asked, well, did he at least win the fight? The other pattern was, which has only emerged in couple of years, is the age of the children when this starts happening. When I started this work, bullying wasn't a hot topic, but as a shame researcher, I was aware that it was a growing trend. In fact, I wrote an op on bullying and reality television for the Houston Chronicle over 10 years ago. Back then, my focus was teenagers because the data pointed to adolescence as a prime age range for these behaviors. In the past couple of years, I'm hearing about girls and boys as young as first grade engaging in these behaviors. How do we break this insidious pattern? Maybe by deciding and showing our children that the solution to being stuck in shame is not to degenerate others stuck just like us, but to join hands and pull free together. For example, if we're at the grocery store and we push our cart past another mother whose child is screaming bloody murder and throwing Cheerios on the floor, we have a choice. If we choose to use that moment to confirm that we're better than she is and that she's stuck in the web in ways we are not, we will roll our eyes in disapproval and walk by. Our other choice, though, is to flash the mother our best. You're not alone. I've been there, sister. Smile because we know what she's feeling. Yes, empathy requires some vulnerability, and we risk getting back a mind your own damn business. Good example. Mind your own damn business. Look, but it's worth it. It doesn't just loosen up the web for her. It loosens it up for us the next time. The next time it's our child and our Cheerios, and you can bet it will be. What gives me hope about our willingness to extend a hand back and support each other is increasing a number of men and women I encounter who are willing to take risks, vulnerability, and share their stories of shame, resilience. I see this as formal and informal mentoring programs. I see this from folks who are writing blogs and sharing their experiences with readers. I see it in schools and programs that not only are becoming increasingly less tolerant of student bullying, but are holding teachers, administrators, and parents accountable for their behaviors. There is a quiet transformation happening that is moving us from turning on each other to turning toward each other. Without question, that transformation will require shame resilience. If we're willing to dare greatly and risk vulnerability with each other, worthiness has the power to set us free. It's not about the back fat, men, women, sex, and body image. Page 101. In 2006, I met with 22 community college students, male and female, to talk about shame. It was my first co-ed large group interview. At some point, a young man in his early 20s explained how he had recently divorced his wife after coming back from serving in the military and finding out she was having an affair. He said he wasn't surprised because he never felt good enough for her. He explained that he constantly asked her what she needed and wanted, and that every time he got close to meeting her needs, she moved the goalpost another 10 feet. A young woman in the class spoke up and said, guys are the same way. They're never satisfied either. We're never pretty, sexy, or skinny enough. Within seconds, the conversation broke out about body image and sex. The discussion was mostly about how it's so scary to have sex with someone you care about when you're worried about how your body looks. The young woman who started the conversation said, it's not easy to have sex and keep your stomach sucked in. How can we get into it when we're worried about our back fat? The young man who had shared the story of his divorce slammed his hand down on the desk and shouted, it's not about the back fat. You're worried about it. We're not. We don't give a shit. The class fell completely quiet. He took a couple of deep breaths and said, stop making up all this stuff about what we're thinking. What we're really thinking is, do you love me? Do you care about me? Do you want me? Am I important to you? Am I good enough? That's what we're thinking. When it comes to sex, it feels like our life is on the line and you're worried about that crap. At that point, half of the young men in the room were so emotional that they had their faces in their hands. A few girls were in tears and I couldn't breathe. The young woman who had brought up the body image issue said, I don't understand. My last boyfriend was always criticizing my body. The young vet who had just brought us all to our knees replied, that's because he's an a-hole. It's not because he's a guy. Some of us are just guys. Give us a break, please. A middle-aged man in the group joined in, staring straight down at his desk. It's true. When you want to be with us in that way, it makes us feel more worthy. We stand a little taller, believe in ourselves more. I don't know why, but it's true, and I've been married since I was 18. It still feels that way with my wife. Never in my life before that moment did I think about men feeling vulnerable about sex. Never did I consider that their self-worth was in any way on the line. I didn't understand. So I interviewed many more men about the topic of sexuality, shame, and worthiness, including mental health professionals. In one of my final interviews on the topic, I sat down with a therapist who had spent more than 25 years working with men. He explained that from the time boys are 8 to 10 years old, they learn that initiating sex is their responsibility and that sexual rejection soon becomes a hallmark of masculine shame. He explained, even in my own life, when my wife isn't interested, I still have to battle feelings of shame. It doesn't matter if I intellectually understand why she's not in the mood. I'm vulnerable and it's very difficult. When I asked him about his work around addiction and pornography, he gave me an answer that helped me understand the issue in an entirely new light. He said, for $5 in 5 minutes, you think you're getting what you need and you don't have to risk rejection. The reason that response was so revelatory to me was because it was so utterly different from what women felt. After interviewing women for a decade, it was clear that women see the issue of men and pornography as having to do with their own inadequate appearance and or lack of sexual expertise. At the end of my interview with this wonderful and wise man, he said, I guess the secret is that sex is terrifying for most men. That's why you see everything from porn to the violent, desperate attempts to exercise power and control. Rejection is deeply painful. Cultivating intimacy, physical or emotional, is almost impossible when our shame triggers meet head on to create the perfect shame storm. Sometimes these shame storms are directly about sex and intimacy, but often there are outlying gremlins wreaking havoc in our relationships. Common issues include body image, aging, appearance, money, parenting, motherhood, exhaustion, resentment, and fear. When I asked men, women, and couples how they practice wholeheartedness around these very sensitive and personal issues, one answer came up again and again. honest, loving conversations that require major vulnerability. We have to be able to talk about how we feel, what we need and desire, and we have to be able to listen with an open heart and an open mind. There's no intimacy without vulnerability. Yet another powerful example of vulnerability as courage. The words we can never take back. Page 104. Too close for missiles. I'm switching to guns. Top Gun. When I talk about couples, I can see how shame creates one of the dynamics most lethal to a relationship. Women who feel shame when they don't feel heard or validated often resort to pushing and provoking with criticism. Why don't you ever do enough? Or you never get it right. Men, in turn, who feel shame when they feel criticized for being inadequate, either shut down, leading women to poke and provoke more, or come back with anger. For the first few years of our marriage, Steve and I fell into this pattern. I remember one argument when we were both angry beyond belief. After 10 minutes of endless chiding on my part, he turned to me and said, "Leave me alone for 20 minutes. I'm done. I won't do this anymore." When he shut and locked the door, I got so mad that I actually banged on the door and said, "Get back out here and fight with me." In that moment, when I heard myself, I saw what was happening. He was on the verge of shutting down or raging, and I was feeling unheard and misunderstood. The result was mutual desperation. Steve and I are heading into our 18th year of marriage, and this year we'll celebrate the 25th anniversary of our first date. He is, without question, the best thing that's ever happened to me. When we got married, neither one of us had any idea what a good partnership looked like or what it took to make it work. If you asked us today what we believe is the key to our relationship, the answer would be vulnerability, love, humor, respect, shame-free fighting, and blame-free living. We learned some of that on our own through a good old trial and error, but we also learned from my work and the research participants who were brave enough to share their stories with me. I'm so grateful to them. I think we can all agree that feeling shame is an incredibly painful experience. What we often don't realize is that perpetrating shame is equally as painful, and no one does that with the precision of a partner or a parent. These are the people who know us best and who bear witness to our vulnerability and fears. Thankfully, we can apologize for shaming someone we love, but the truth is that those shaming comments leave marks. And shaming someone we love around vulnerability is the most serious of all security breaches. Even if we apologize, we've done serious damage because we've demonstrated our willingness to use sacred information as a weapon. In the Gifts of Imperfection, I share the definition of love that I developed based on my data, and here it is. We cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known, and when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Love is not something we give or get. It is something that we nurture and grow, a connection that can only be cultivated between two people when it exists within each one of them. We can only love others as much as we love ourselves. Shame, blame, disrespect, betrayal, and the withholding of affection damage the roots from which love grows. Love can only survive those injuries if they are acknowledged, healed, and rare. Developing this definition was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Professionally, it just seemed arrogant to try to define something as big and important as love. Professionally, it just seemed arrogant to try to define something as big and important as love. It felt like an endeavor best left to the poets and artists. My motivation was not to nail it, but to start a conversation about what we need and want from love. I don't care if I'm wrong, but let's talk about love. Let's have some conversations about the experience that gives meaning in our lives. Personally, I fought the data with everything I have, over and over. I heard the idea of self-love as a prerequisite to loving others, and I hated it. Sometimes it's so much easier to love Steve and the kids than it is to love myself. It's so much easier to accept their quirks and eccentricities than it is to practice self-love around what I see as my deep flaws. But in practicing self-love over the past couple of years, I can say that it has immeasurably deepened my relationships with the people I love. It's given me the courage to show up and be vulnerable in new ways. And that's what love is all about. As we think about shame and love, the most pressing question is this: are we practicing love? Yes, most of us are really good at professing it, sometimes 10 times a day, but are we walking the talk? Are we being our most vulnerable selves? Are we showing trust, kindness, affection, and respect to our partners? It's not the lack of professing that gets us in trouble in our relationships. It's failing to practice love that leads to hurt. Becoming real. Do you remember how I mentioned earlier? Excuse me. How I mentioned earlier in the chapter that researchers found that attributes such as nice, thin, and modest were qualities that our culture associates with femininity. Well, when looking at the attributes associated with masculinity in the US, the same researchers identified the following: winning, emotional control, risk-taking, violence, dominance, playboy, self-reliance, primacy of work, power over women, disdain for homosexuality, and pursuit of status. Understanding these lists and what they mean is critically important to understanding shame and cultivating resilience. As I explained in the beginning of this chapter, shame is universal, but the messages and expectations that drive shame are organized by gender. These feminine and masculine norms are the foundation of shame triggers, and here's why. If women want to play by the rules, they need to be sweet, thin, and pretty, stay quiet, be perfect mom and wives, and not own their power. One move outside of these expectations, and bam, the shame web closes in. Men, on the other hand, need to stop feeling, start earning, put everyone in their place, and climb their way to the top or die trying. Push open the lid of your box to grab a breath of air, or slide that curtain back a bit to see what's going on, and bam, shame cuts you down to size. I think it's important to add that for men, there's also a culture message that promotes homophobic cruelty. If you want to be masculine in our culture, it's not enough to be straight. You must also show an outward disgust toward the gay community. The idea of do this or dislike these people if you want to be accepted into our group emerged as a major shame setup in the research. It doesn't matter if the group is a church or a gang or a sewing circle or masculinity itself. Asking members to dislike, disown, or distance themselves from another group of people as a condition of belonging is always about control and power. I think we have to question the intentions of any group that insists on disdain toward other people as a membership requirement. It may be disguised as belonging, but real belonging doesn't necessitate disdain. When I look at those 11 attributes of masculinity, that's not the kind of man I want to spend my life with, and that's not how I want to raise my son. The word that comes to my mind when I think about a life built around those qualities is lonely. The picture in my mind goes to the Wizard of Oz. He's not a real person with human needs, but a great and powerful projection of what a man is supposed to be: lonely, exhausting, and soul-sucking. When I talk to men and women with high levels of shame resilience, they are keenly aware of these lists. They keep those structures in mind so that when shame starts creeping up on them, or they find themselves fully in shame, they can reality check these norms, quotation marks, thus practicing the second element of shame resilience, critical awareness. Basically, they can choose consciously not to play along. The man in shame says, I'm not supposed to get emotional when I have to lay off these people. The man practicing shame resilience responds, I'm not buying into this message. I've worked with these guys for 5 years. I know their families. I'm allowed to care about them. Shame whispers in the ear of the woman who's out of town on business. You're not a good mother because you're going to miss your son's class play. She replies, I hear you, but I'm not playing that tape today. My mothering is way bigger than one class performance. You can leave now. One of the most powerful ways that our shame triggers get reinforced is when we enter into a social contract based on these gender straitjackets. Our relationships are defined by women and men saying, quote, I'll play my role and you play yours. One of the patterns revealed in the research was how all that role playing becomes almost unbearable around midlife. Men feel increasingly disconnected, and the fear of failure becomes paralyzing. Women are exhausted, and for the first time, they begin to clearly see that the expectations are impossible. These accomplishments, accolades, and acquisitions that are a seductive part of living by this contract start to feel like a Faustian bargain. Remembering that shame is the fear of disconnection, the fear that we're unlovable and don't belong, makes it easy to see why so many people in midlife over-focus on their children's lives, work 60 hours a week, or turn to affairs, addiction, and disengagement. We start to unravel. The expectations and messages that fuel shame keep us from fully realizing who we are as people. Today, I look back and feel so grateful to women and men who have shared their stories with me. I'm thankful for the people who were brave enough to say, quote, "These are my secrets and my fears. Here's how they brought me to my knees, and here's how I learned to stand in my worthiness again." I'm also indebted to the men in the yellow Izod sweater. His vulnerability and honesty set in motion work that has forever changed my career and, more importantly, my life. As I look back on what I've learned about shame, gender, and worthiness, the greatest lesson is this. If we're going to find our way out of shame and back to each other, vulnerability is the path and courage is the light. To set down those lists of what we're supposed to be is brave. To love ourselves and support each other in the process of becoming real is perhaps the greatest single act of daring greatly. I'll leave you with this passage from the 1922 children's classic, The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams. My friend D.D. Parker Wright sent it to me last year with a note that said, "This is what being wholehearted is all about." I agree. It's a beautiful reminder on how much easier it is to become real when we know that we're loved. Here is from the passage from the book, and this will conclude this particular chapter. All right. "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" ? asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he said, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily or have sharp edges or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all because once you are real, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand." And there goes my highlighter. That's a good lesson. Because once you are real, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand, because realness is beautiful. And that concludes things. Okay. That concludes chapter 3. What a deep chapter. There's 3 parts: understanding and combating shame. Let me know if you understand shame a little bit better, what your thoughts are. Really, really awesome how she's researched so many people and got so many answers from interviews that she's done with so many people to gather the data that she is sharing with us so eloquently today. So super grateful for that. And next chapter is chapter 4. It's called The Vulnerability Armory. Okay. Let me know if you're ready. We'll see you soon. Again, my name is Vanessa Black and appreciate your time here. Hope you got a lot of value out of it. And we'll see you in the next episode, next Read With Me session, chapter 4, Daring Greatly. And don't forget to check out The Compound Effect that my love, the love of my life, Isabel Bedell, is currently reading. So go check it out. See you soon. Take care. God bless.